Marvel and DC, Peter Parker's brother becomes the strongest hero across the multiverse. Episode 51, Mercy. The Mark I can withstand attacks from small and medium-sized firearms, but it is difficult to withstand rocket attacks. The most important thing is that the explosion pressure of the rocket is simply not something Stark's body can withstand. However, Stark looked at the row of rocket launchers and couldn't think of any solution. Not to mention that Ethan was hiding behind him. Once he hid, Ethan would definitely die. It's impossible for Stark to do this in the face of his savior. What's more, the bulky Mark I is not enough to support him in this action of dodging close-range rockets. Click. Click. Rockets trailed flames one after another, almost instantly. Huge amounts of explosions occurred around the Mark I. Boom. Boom. Under the impact of huge amounts of explosion, Mark I staggered and fell backward. Stark felt the world spinning, and there was a roar in his ears, but he could no longer move. Ethan is doing better, but without the blockage of Mark I, what will happen to the next wave of attacks? Stark, who was lying on the ground, looked at the piles of ammunition boxes around him, most of which had the Stark Industries logo printed on them. He was filled with regret. Opposite him, a new round of rockets has been filled. Stark's eyes widened in despair. Boom. Like a hurricane, lures descended from the sky. Huge amounts of dust swept away everything except the heavy Mark I, and Ethan hiding behind. All the other 10 Rings gang members flew out in all directions, along with a large number of ammunition boxes. A few seconds later, a thunderous sonic boom came from the horizon and exploded in the sky above the lure. This is because the lure has deliberately slowed down as it approaches, to prevent it from hurting Stark. When the dust settles, Stark stared dumbfoundedly at Luya, who was like a god, descending to Earth. He felt in a trance and had an unreal feeling in his heart. He suddenly remembered that Luya once said that as long as he called his name, he would appear when he was in danger. But, you didn't call him by his name either? At this moment, Stark has never felt so worthy of investing in Ping and Street School. Looking at Stark, who was still unable to come to his senses, Luya stepped forward and asked, "How about it, can you still move?" After hearing the sound of the lure, Stark woke up as if from a dream. He tried to activate the Mark I again, but failed. Stark struggled to get out of the mecha, but couldn't, which made him look a little funny. Tisk. Mr. Stark, if I take a photo of you looking like you now, I'm afraid I can sell it for a good price. Faced with Luya's teasing, Stark shot back, "Well, Luya boy, if I take a picture of you now, I'm afraid it will cause an uproar, right?" Luya smiled slightly, then his eyes turned red. Wow. Hey. 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 Feeling the destructive power and heat of the laser light, the hair on Stark's body stood up and he shouted loudly. Immediately afterwards, each alloy joint of the Mark I was successfully decomposed under the precise laser cutting of Luya. When the lure stopped outputting light, Stark calmed down slightly. "Mr. Stark, people should always be aware of their own situation." Stark ignored Lua's taunting and instead looked at Lua with extremely longing eyes. During this period, Stark was a playboy and had not yet cooperated closely with S.H.I.E.L.D. Therefore, he doesn't even know about the existence of mutants, let alone some other supernatural abilities. "Hey." Stark's voice was filled with excitement. "The light you just had." He motioned to the lure's eyes. "How powerful is it? Is it based on the same principle as traditional laser weapons?" But then he denied himself. "Oh no, that's impossible, I'm stupid." Faced with Stark's curiosity, Luya said, "Anyway, it's no problem to be able to cut 100 Mr. Starks in an instant." What do you mean? What does cutting 100 Mr. Starks mean?" But soon, Luya gave the answer with practical actions. All around, the members of the 10 Commandments gang gathered after the dust dispersed. There are nearly 100 people, they are fully armed and even have armored vehicles. The first wave of gang members who were attacked by Luya just now have no bones left, and the remaining 100 people obviously don't know what just happened here. Looking at the various weapons aimed at him, Luya glanced at Stark and Ethan. "Lower your head." Stark asked confused, "What?" Ethan also received a puzzled look. But the next second, they squatted down directly holding their heads. In Luya's eyes, a huge amount of heat is gathering. In the horrified eyes of everyone in the 10 Rings gang, Luya slowly floated in the air. Looking at the nearly 100 people present, Luya was thinking about how to deal with them. Perhaps because of the Superman template, Luya's killing character has a touch of kindness mixed in. They may not be guilty enough to die. Let's give him a small punishment, but a big warning. Then, the laser beam shot out. Wherever they went, the legs of all standing members of the 10 Rings gang were cut off. In just 1 second, more than 100 people suddenly dwarfed and fell to the ground like dumplings. As for those riding in armored vehicles and the like, if they are unlucky, they may go directly to see God. In an instant, blood stained the ground red, and screams could be heard all around. The output power of Luya's laser light was controlled so well that it even helped them stop bleeding. In this way, they will not die. Looking at the tragic scenes around him, even Stark, the victim, couldn't bear it. There's no need to torture them, right? He swallowed hard. This is too exaggerated. Hearing Stark's muttering, Luya was thoughtful. You're right, it's too cruel for them. Sorry, I didn't think carefully. Cyclops' energy gathers again. Boom. The sudden rise in heat even caused an explosion. This time, Luya increased his power and gave them relief. Now, the surroundings are clean. Stark. The devil is in the world? Luya turned his head and saw Stark's body shaking slightly. Why, Mr. Stark? Are you still cold on this hot day? Hee. Okay, Mr. Stark. The inauguration ceremony of the new school is waiting for us today, you won't forget it, right? Stark looked at the sky and forced a smile on his lips. Well, I'm afraid it's too late to rush back today, right? That's not necessarily true. After saying that, Luya flew to Stark and hugged him and Ethan. Don't move. If you are more than half a meter away from me, I cannot guarantee your safety. Immediately, Luya bent his legs slightly and soared into the sky. What is the principle? Episode 52, Stark's Transformation, S.H.I.E.L.D. Director, maybe you can take a look at this. Phil Coulson took out an envelope from his body and gently placed it in front of Nick Fury. Fury opened the envelope and found 2 photos inside. The one in the first photo is the Lore flying with Stark and Ethan. It's just that the photo is quite blurry and can only be seen faintly as a black dot. Of course, this black spot can be photographed, which is why Luya did not hide himself. Tell the truth and decide to expose yourself completely. Even Luya himself didn't know if it was because he was influenced by the template of his motherland. But it doesn't matter, he can almost be called the pinnacle of planet level now. There are almost no people on Earth who can make their own decisions. On Fury's side, looking at the photo, he cast doubtful eyes on Coulson. What's this? It's just such a black spot, nothing can be seen. Before Coulson could answer, he picked up the second photo. And this second photo is much clearer. Luya held Stark and Ethan in each hand. It can even be seen that in the photo, Ethan's face is a little green, probably because he is afraid of heights. Is this Stark? The first thing Fury noticed was Stark next to the Lore. Because of the size of Stark's industry and the particularity of its weapons manufacturing, Fury has always been paying attention to Stark. Of course, these are all superficial reasons. In fact, Tony Stark's father, Howard Stark, had a hand in the establishment of S.H.I.E.L.D. Only then did Fury seem to react. Are they flying in the sky? Coulson nodded. Yes, and the speed reaches Mach 10. This is impossible. Upon hearing Coulson's confirmation, Fury exclaimed, the shock wave formed by Mach 10 is enough to instantly heat the air to hundreds or even thousands of degrees. Don't worry about flying. After all, Fury knows about the existence of enhanced humans. But is the speed too exaggerated? In terms of speed, the physical body of the young man in the photo is at least as strong as a nickel-based high-temperature alloy. And, can it circle the Earth in a few hours? Fury didn't know that Luya had a biological force field, so he made a guess based on his own understanding. Coulson looked at his boss helplessly. He himself was quite frightened when he saw this photo, especially since the agent who took the photo stated that the speed reached Mach 10. But this is the fact. The agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. is not so free to fake a supernatural creature to scare his boss. Seeing Coulson's serious look, Fury also understood that the things in the photo were indeed true. Then, I have to know, why would Tony Stark be with such a Superman? Fury, after thinking about it, I used the word Superman to describe the Lore. The size of Stark Industry is too huge, and Tony Stark was originally an extremely talented scientist. Fury is mainly worried that if Stark is bewitched and joins forces with such a Superman-level figure, he may directly subvert America. In fact, Fury is simply overthinking. If Luya really wanted to rule the Earth, let alone America, it would only take more time to bask in the sun. Well, we have already investigated this young man. This is a report about him. Fury took the file. I didn't have any extraordinary performance before high school, I just had a strong body. But when I'm about to graduate, from my motherland? S.H.I.E.L.D. is very efficient at this stage, and the traces of the Lore that were not deliberately hidden have been completely displayed in the file. So, Kingpin's death is related to him? In the past 2 days, Kingpin's death has also brought a lot of work to Fury. He had just investigated the existence of a person named Motherland People, but unexpectedly, the real owner was photographed. Yes. Coulson said with emotion, I didn't expect that a guy like Kingpin would die in the hands of this young man. After Kingpin's death, not only his assets attracted prying eyes from all parties. More importantly, the relationship between many senior officials and him was instantly interrupted, and disputes of interest arose. Call. Fury took a breath, and suddenly he had a thought. Do you think we can recruit him for our use? Currently, SHIELD is relatively short of manpower, and Fury began to consider the feasibility of recruiting lures. Maybe? Coulson scratched his head and replied following Fury's words. The more Fury thought about it, the more possible it seemed. He calls himself a native of the motherland. Maybe he is also a young man dreaming of a superhero? If you give this kind of young man a thumbs up and give him some honors, it will be easy for him to return home. Fury didn't know that if he had used the condition of prestige to talk to Luya earlier, Luya might actually agree. But now that the motherland template has been perfected, things like prestige are no longer so tempting. In addition, since you have decided to contact the people of the motherland, let's plan in advance and send someone to contact Tony Stark. What Fury calls contact here is actually sending Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow, to see Tony Stark. Hell's Kitchen. Well, the school has been completely completed so quickly. Finally getting rid of the nightmare of the Ten Rings gang, Tony Stark looked at the school and sighed. Although he almost died abroad, Tony Stark's mood was extremely different at this time. See the boundary between life and death. I have witnessed with my own eyes that the weapons produced by myself have brought so much harm to the world. Stark couldn't help but reflect on himself. Maybe after I go back, I should close the weapons research and development department and sales department. Yes, just do it. Tony Stark's eyes gradually became firm. This is also the reason why Luya didn't remind him about the danger of the Ten Rings gang at the beginning. Without this experience, it would be difficult for Tony Stark to become the respected Iron Man who is willing to sacrifice himself for all mankind. But at this moment, hearing Stark's determination, Luya asked a little funny, why, do you feel guilty? Or do you think Stark Industries can reduce wars in the world without selling weapons? You should know who the largest arms dealer in the world is, right? War is an indelible melody in the Marvel world, whether it is a race on Earth or in the universe. No. Stark's eyes flashed. At the very least, I can't be the executioner. After seeing civilians being harmed by his own weapons, Stark had already made up his mind. Lore. Stark turned to look at the lore. Let's cooperate. With your strength, my creativity. We can definitely make a difference in this world if we join forces. Episode 53, Captain America wakes up. After talking to Luya, Stark continued to turn to look at Ethan. Ethan, come here too, you are my savior. I can give you 5% of Stark Industries shares, and we can join forces together. Because of the lore, not only was Tony Stark fine, but Ethan also escaped from the death ending in the original movie and survived. 5% of Stark Industries is not a small amount. After all, Stark Industries is not yet Tony Stark's one-person haul. Ethan had no problem with Tony Stark's offer of an olive branch. He was originally an outstanding scientist, and he also contributed to the birth of Mark I. Stark Industries is wealthy and has its own large laboratories and scientific research sites. For Ethan, this is a perfect place to go. Seeing Ethan agree to Stark, Luya guessed. Perhaps Stark's Mark suit can develop at a faster pace than in the movie. Here, Tony Stark looked at Luya with a more scorching gaze. Luya, what did you say? As long as you are willing to come, I am willing to share all my remaining shares with you equally. For Tony Stark himself, his commitment is not unimportant. Both Stark himself and Ethan on the side thought this condition was fair. Luya looked at Tony Stark with a sincere face, and Luya was not too busy refusing. Although at present, mechanical technology has limited improvement for itself. However, no one would dislike having more money. The future potential of Stark Industries is simply unlimited. Okay, Mr. Stark. Luya nodded and agreed. It looks a bit like Tony Stark begging to give away his shares. Marvelous. But Tony thought for a while and said, actually, you can just call me Tony, Mr. Stark, or something like that, it's a bit too abrupt. Okay, Tony. Luya smiled. Mainly, he remembered the jokes that netizens made about the name Stark in his previous life. Times Square, New York. A young man who looked to be in his 20s, but less than 30, looked at everything around him blankly. He also remembered his name, Steve Rogers. But looking at the tall buildings and pedestrians with different expressions around him, he fell into confusion. Why are the sounds around me so familiar, but everything I see so strange? Why are the streets full of cars? Why is everyone dressed so weirdly? Is the war over? Is the world at peace? Steve shook his head. What's wrong with this world? At this time, he suddenly perceived someone approaching him from behind. Who? Steve turned his head suddenly and saw a one-eyed black braised egg appearing behind him. The braised egg is exactly what Fury is. Mr. Rogers. I'm surprised, today's society is so beautiful, Steve whispered. Compared to that time, everything around us now looks so beautiful. Can you tell me what time it is now? Steve only felt that he slept for a long, long time, but he didn't know how long exactly. This is the 21st century, and your war-torn era is long over. Fury explained modern time to Steve. What, I actually slept for more than half a century? When he knew that he no longer had to perform everywhere to boost morale, Steve didn't show any relief. Instead, he murmured, I missed an appointment. Steve's voice was trembling, a date that was 70 years late. Seeing Steve's devastated look, Fury had the initial intention to establish a reunion and absorb Team America into it. But he knew that this matter could not be rushed, so he said, Captain, maybe you can take a look at the world and experience the beauty of life again. When Steve heard the familiar title Captain, he felt that this title was so ironic. I am just a person from 70 years ago, to put it nicely, I am Captain America. But in reality, it's just a mascot to help boost morale. Now, 70 years have passed, and I am nearly 100 years old. Even his beloved Peggy failed in his appointment with her. And I didn't even officially confess to her. At this moment, there are no expectations of home and country, and no haze of war. Steve looked straight into his heart, but he couldn't go back to the past. Steve thought sadly. Maybe I should have died 70 years ago, or been frozen forever. A love nearly a century apart. It sounds so wonderful. But it is so sad. Steve doesn't know at this time that Peggy is actually still alive, even though she is almost 90 years old. Walking aimlessly in one direction. Steve can still feel the power rushing through his body, and he is even becoming stronger as he continues to recover. That's because the super serum is at work. He can survive in the ice for this reason. Shall I be the principal? Listening to everyone's words, Luya was stunned for a moment. Erica glanced at Stark and said to Lua. Yes, besides Mr. Stark, is there anyone here who is more suitable to be the principal of the school than you? Yeah. Stark quickly answered, you know, if I want to do research, I definitely won't have time to be the principal. If Stark becomes the principal, the school's name will probably be Stark Academy. That's fine. Luya nodded. Although the purpose of establishing the school in Hell's Kitchen was not pure. After all, what I considered at that time was more about gaining prestige and improving my model as a native of the motherland. In terms of results, even before the school was built, his reputation in Hell's Kitchen had already reached its peak. This kind of reputation is not fear, but respect from everyone. Therefore, although the motherland template has been completed, Luya also decided to run this school well. He understands that his strength is bound to become stronger and stronger. However, what is the joy of living? Obviously, social interaction is a very important part. As for whether he could serve as the principal as a college student, Luya had never considered it, so there was no need. At this point, so hastily, Parker College was born. The civilian residents of Hell's Kitchen were delighted. Because they know that from now on, the main theme here will no longer be sin and darkness. On the first day of Parker School, Hell's Kitchen ushered in a big sweep of lures. All the gangsters with unforgivable crimes, as well as Kingpin's die-hard remnants, were all sent to see God by him. Episode 54, Tony Stark's Dilemma. In the leisurely days of sunbathing, time passes quietly. Well, maybe I should go out and get another odd job? Ben Parker put down the newspaper in his hand and said these words that he had thought carefully about. The university is about to start, and Ben is worried about the financial situation of his son and nephew. Generally speaking, we believe that young people should support themselves. However, the tuition fees for college are really not low, not to mention the expenses inside the college. Ben knew that his nephew Peter had a part-time job delivering pizza, but he heard that his wages were often deducted for eating. Recently, I was even fired by my boss due to customer complaints. Dad, you don't need to worry about the tuition. We will take care of it ourselves. Luya replied softly. He did not take the initiative to tell his father Ben about his affairs. And he also tried to give his father some money. However, Ben's reply to Luya was, young man, I don't think I'm old enough to be dependent on my children yet. Ben's life is considered wonderful among ordinary people, which also created his tough character. Luya. After hearing his son's confidence in his own and his younger brother's tuition, Ben Jiang looked at him with deep eyes and said, speaking of which, you seem to be very busy lately. Can you tell me what you have been busy with recently? It seems that Ben has some doubts about what Luya has done recently. Just like in the movie, Ben also guessed the changes in his nephew Peter. Luya pondered for a moment. The reason for always using Gwen doesn't really work anymore. The main reason why he did not tell his father Ben about his affairs was that Luya also knew that his methods of handling things were sometimes quite extreme. In this regard, it may be somewhat inconsistent with my father's philosophy. Looking at the delicate atmosphere on the court, May didn't want these things to break the gap between father and son. She felt that maybe her son, like all young people, had reached a rebellious stage. But in fact, this is entirely what Mei Duo thought about. Luya, you know. Mei looked at her son with a hint of affection. Your father just wants you to avoid detours. When we were young, this society was full of temptations. Luya smiled slightly and said, I know, Mom. But I can promise that I will stick to the justice in my heart. Of course, this justice is defined by Luya himself. He still didn't tell the truth. For someone like his father, extraordinary power was still too far ahead of his time. Okay, Luya, I believe you. Ben nodded and said nothing more. On the side, Peter, who was listening, breathed a sigh of relief. He was actually worried that his recent abnormal behavior would attract his uncle's attention. However, with his brother Luya at the front, the uncle didn't seem to want to delve into this issue any further. The intensity of crime in New York has been on the rise recently. Many times, even if Peter and Gwen, the two Spider-Men, are dispatched at the same time, it is difficult to completely stop criminal activities. Sometimes when encountering really difficult enemies, Peter would also go to Luya for help. He knew that Luya often stayed in Hell's Kitchen and ran it well. However, when faced with his younger brother Peter's request for help, Luya would usually refuse on the grounds that he was not feeling well. I'm not a fire captain. It would be too troublesome if I had to deal with minor crimes myself. If we meet on the way, the solution will be solved. Otherwise, Luya is still mainly focused on basking in the sun to improve its strength. The Ancient One's words were still in Luya's mind. Since even the Ancient One does not have any competence to face possible crises in the future universe. That means that simply super heavenly father level strength may not be enough. It must be at least the top single universe level, or even reach the multi-universe level, to have complete confidence. Luya also thought about the infinite gems, the heaven-defying artifacts in the unit universe. However, he had no clue as to the whereabouts of this cosmic gem. Moreover, Luya felt that maybe even the infinite gems were not up to par. Otherwise, the Ancient One should have given the time stone to himself. Luya opened the system panel. Superman, Man of Steel, Template Unlock Level, 15. Regarding the current unlocking level, Luya is relatively satisfied. The only pity is that he used the flying ability modeled by the Motherland to fly into space. However, the simple Motherland template does not have the ability to absorb yellow solar radiation energy. In Superman's developmental stage, he cannot withstand too much radiation energy at once, otherwise it will be difficult to absorb it. This may also be the reason why Superman did not rush directly into the sun in the early stage of the original work. Outside world. In the past period of time, some things have happened in New York. What attracted the most attention was undoubtedly Tony Stark's announcement to close the Weapons Research and Development Department and Sales Department of Stark Industries. Once the news was released, Stark Industries' stock price fell sharply. At the same time, divisions began to appear within the company. Shareholders, led by Obadiah, are preparing to split the company. However, this time because of the intervention of Luya. Obadiah didn't even have a chance to secretly create an Iron Overlord, so he met God directly. At the same time, Luya also feels more and more that when faced with trouble, it is easier to directly solve the troublemaker. After this, Stark Industries did not remain depressed for long. Thanks to Ethan's help and Luya, the resources of Parker Group and Stark Industries were integrated. This allows Mark III to develop at an extremely fast pace. Classic red and yellow colors, hugely powerful electromagnetic pulse cannon, etc. Now the only check to balance the advent of Mark III is the core reactor issue. And this is also a hurdle that Tony Stark must overcome. On this day, Luya received an invitation from Stark. In Stark's private office, various virtual projection technologies are being widely used. However, for the current technology of Stark Industries, lures are still not very popular. Perhaps only the future Iron Man who can defeat the father-level Thanos, which is ridiculous, can truly be considered to have considerable strength in the entire single universe. At this time, a woman wearing a shirt, short skirt and red curly hair appeared in front of Luya. Hello, my name is Natasha Romanoff-Rushman. Are you the Mr. Homelander Tony mentioned? Tony, he just finished recording the experiment and will be here soon. As she spoke, Natasha Romanoff licked her lips, seemingly teasingly. Natasha Romanoff-Rushman is the Black Widow, disguising herself, Natasha Romanoff-Romanoff. She knew that Luya was a native of the Motherland. A month ago, a colleague tried to recruit people from the Motherland, but unfortunately, it ended in failure. A native of the country with such a great reputation is so young. Episode 55, Declaration of Funeral Arrangements. Although Black Widow also saw some information about Luya from Fury. However, after meeting in person, she was still a little surprised by Luya's youth. It is hard to imagine that such a young person would be so cruel and ruthless when facing the enemy. Of course, SHIELD currently lacks such talents. Black Widow thought, although her mission is to lurk next to Tony Stark. But if the lore is brought back to Shield, maybe Director Fury will be quite happy. Black Widow already knows the existence of alien forces at this time, and the Earth may be exposed to danger at any time. Who doesn't want a strong and reliable partner? As for recruiting lures, Black Widow thinks she already has some ideas. Facing such a hot-blooded young man, one's own beauty may be the greatest weapon. Here, with such a distinctive appearance and name, Luya still recognized Black Widow even though she made a little disguise. As a widowed sister, she was really pretty good when she was young. Seeing that she seemed to be trying to pull off a beauty trap, the corners of Luya's mouth rose slightly. "Miss Natasha Romanoff, do you have anything to drink?" After saying that, Luya was not polite and sat directly on the sofa. "Coffee? Can." While preparing coffee, I felt some hot eyes behind me. Natasha Romanoff was secretly happy about the success of the plan, but she was also a little embarrassed. However, the quality of the agent and her experiences in previous years allowed her to quickly adjust her mentality. After Luya looked at it for a long time, he suddenly found that red light began to gather in front of his eyes. This seems to be a precursor to unlocking heat vision? However, the time when it is about to be unlocked is really not a good time. After all, he is a serious person. Damn it. This must be the remnant of the influence of the Motherland's template on me. It can be said that it is not without reason that Natasha Romanoff can feel the burning of Luya's sight. With a slight blush, not sure how much of it was fake, Natasha Romanoff handed the coffee to Luya. Because the lure was sitting on the sofa, when Natasha Romanoff bent over the front of her shirt. Obviously, she did it on purpose. Of course, Luya will not miss this opportunity. Although he cannot see the whole picture, it is still in vain if he doesn't see it, right? "I don't know, Mr. Motherland. Just call me Luya." Luya interrupted. "Just pretend, keep pretending, see who can suffer the loss." "Okay, lore." Natasha Romanoff flipped her red curly hair. "I wonder if you are free this afternoon? Maybe we can have a meal together or something." Luya raised his eyebrows slightly. "Oh? Is this a date?" Natasha Romanoff seemed shy. But before she could answer, Luya continued to ask, "But aren't you Tony's assistant?" Natasha Romanoff proudly held her chest out. "Well, employees should also have their own time, right? Tony Stark's time is running out." Natasha Romanoff knew that his body was deeply poisoned by palladium due to the microreactor. Even S.H.I.E.L.D. has no good solution for this. Norman Osborn proposed the use of human enhancement potions. However, Luya and Stark had talked about the Green Goblin's personality problem, so in the face of such serious side effects of the human enhancement potion, Stark finally decided not to take it. Of course, the Green Goblin personality was originally only related to the Osborn family. The effect of the human enhancement potion on amplifying a person's original emotions is real, just like the super soldier serum. However, human body strengthening drugs may have even greater side effects. In this way, using people from the Motherland to fill Stark's position seems to be a good choice. At this time, Fury was already planning to reunite. Natasha Romanoff believes that it may also be a good choice for the stronger Luya to lead the Avengers. Just when Natasha Romanoff was about to continue, a voice came from outside the office. "What are you talking about? I thought I heard my secretary complaining about working hours, right?" Stark opened the office door and walked in. He was wearing a suit and leather shoes, but his face looked very haggard. "Boss." Natasha Romanoff stood beside Stark at the right time. After all, she was still nominally Tony Stark's secretary. At the same time, behind Stark, Natasha Romanoff glanced at the lure again with seductive eyes. She trusts Luya not to report her actions to Stark. However, her estimate was obviously wrong. "Tony." A smile appeared on Luya's face. And this smile suddenly made Natasha Romanoff feel a little uneasy. Luya continued to smile and said, "There seems to be something wrong with your secretary. She was asking me about my date at night just now." After hearing Luya's words, Stark first looked at Natasha Romanoff with puzzled eyes. During this period, Stark only had some doubts about Natasha Romanoff's identity, but he was still attracted by her beauty. But soon, he came back to his senses. "Lore, you know." Stark curled his lips. "I have no problem with you dating me if you want. No matter how important beauty is, it is not as important as lures in Stark's eyes." Stark can still tell the difference in these matters. Moreover, he knew that his body was seriously poisoned by palladium and he was almost unable to support himself, so he also had the idea of arranging his funeral arrangements. Luya thought for a while and shook his head. "Let's forget it. It would be okay if it was someone else, but Black Widow would later bear considerable weight in the Avengers. She was later willing to sacrifice herself to obtain the Soul Stone to save those who were destroyed by Thanos' snap of his fingers. In this regard, Luya shows respect." "Okay." Stark shrugged. Immediately afterwards, he started to talk about the business. Actually, the main reason why I came to you today is for some other matters. Stark weighed his words carefully, trying not to let Luya see his weakness. If. Luya, are you willing to take over as the CEO of the company? In the movie, Stark was planning to appoint Pepper as CEO. But at this time, Stark had no idea at all. He felt that if he died, perhaps letting Luya become the CEO of Stark Industries would be the best choice. After all, although Pepper's ability is sufficient, his prestige is hard to convince the public. As for lures don't need prestige to convince the crowd. Luya looked at Starks pretending to be relaxed and replied deliberately, "What's wrong, Tony? You look like you're explaining your funeral arrangements. Can this be seen?" Paying no attention to Natasha Romanoff, Luya said something that made Stark extremely excited. "It's just palladium poisoning. There's no need to deal with the funeral. What if I can do something about it?" Episode 56, Little Pepper. The reason why Tony Stark died soon was simply because he could not find another new element that could replace the palladium element. Moreover, because he is unwilling to give up his identity as Iron Man, Stark is also unwilling to stop using palladium nuclear reactors. Luya remembered that the solution seemed to lie in some old things left by his father Howard. In the movie, Stark relied on the clues in it to finally find a new energy source that could replace palladium. And the old things Howard left behind. Luya looked at Natasha Romanoff, and it seemed that this clue came from S.H.I.E.L.D. Fury later reminded Stark to look for clues in Howard's old things, which also confirmed this. As for whether Fury means to repay a favor, it's hard to say. Here, Stark felt happy when he heard Luya say that there was a possible solution to palladium poisoning. Then it sank again. He believed in the strength of the lure, but the replacement of the palladium element could not be made with fists. This requires the use of brains. This is a scientific study. As for scientific research, Stark is confident that his ability is already the best in the world. Thinking of this, Stark looked at Luya with a wry smile and said, "Luya, I don't know how you knew about my palladium poisoning, but thank you anyway. However, the palladium element is not that easy to replace." Looking at the frustrated Stark, Luya asked with some confusion, "Why not stop using palladium reactors? Is Iron Man's identity really more important than your life?" The role of the nuclear reactor is not only to power the magnetic suction device to absorb the shrapnel in Stark's chest. Its purpose is also to supply energy to the Mark armor. Hearing Luya's question, Stark thought for a moment and said, "Luya, actually I envy you. You have a physical fitness far beyond that of Superman. Even if I become Iron Man, I will never be your opponent. What's more important is that your ability has no side effects." After Stark became Iron Man, he consciously became a superhero. The consideration here may not be to apologize for the harm caused by weapons once produced by Stark Industries. After a pause, Stark continued, "If I stop using the reactor from now on, maybe I can survive for a few more years. The price is that I have to lose my identity as Iron Man, and I may not even be able to maintain normal actions. Without the micronuclear reactor, Stark would need other instruments to power the magnetic attraction." Luya nodded, expressing understanding. Many people have different understandings of life. Some people choose quality over length of life. It is better to die as Iron Man if he is living with illness. Perhaps from this moment on, Stark had already started to realize that he would sacrifice himself and snap his fingers later. Stark said as he unbuttoned his tie and shirt, revealing that his chest was filled with black veins. In the middle, a circular light-emitting device is fixed. This is a micronuclear reactor. Its existence has made Iron Man successful, but it has also harmed Tony Stark. On the side, Natasha Romanoff looked at Stark's chest with bulging black veins and covered her mouth in surprise. Although she stayed by Stark's side, she didn't know that the palladium element had corroded him so seriously. "Tony." At this time, the door to Stark's office suddenly opened. A woman walked in wearing high heels. "Tony, why do you want to transfer 10% of the shares to me?" She knew that Stark had split his shares in half and given them to others. In addition to the ones given to Ethan, there are also miscellaneous things. Stark's original stake is actually not that large anymore. However, he gave himself 10% of the shares in one breath. "Especially when I have a Cold War relationship with him. This makes it difficult for Pepper to understand what Stark is thinking. If it was to apologize to myself, this apology gift seemed too expensive." At this time, Pepper Potts had not yet confirmed her relationship with Stark. Moreover, although Stark became Iron Man, his personality has changed greatly. But some of this playboy aspect has been retained. For example, the close relationship with Natasha Romanoff made Pepper quite jealous. Luya looked at Xiaojiao, who came in aggressively, smiled and shook his head. Looking at the momentum, it seemed like Stark had taken her shares. After hearing Pepper's voice, Stark's expression was obviously flustered. Because he decided to entrust the company to Luya, he did not appoint Pepper as CEO like in the movie, but gave her 10% of the shares. It can be said that except for Luya, even Ethan and Happy, who saved Stark's life, only got a small share. From this, it can be seen that Stark's love for Pepper is obviously sincere. After hurriedly putting on his clothes, Stark straightened his expression and turned his head expressionlessly. He tried his best to pretend not to care and said in an indifferent tone, "Well, it's my company anyway. I can give the stock to whomever I want, right?" Tony also knew Pepper's feelings for him, so he wanted to minimize the harm his death caused to her. "You're always so arrogant, Tony." Looking at Stark, who looked indifferent, Pepper's expression softened. Although he has been in love for a long time, Stark is really not good at lying when it comes to the one he loves. At this time, Pepper suddenly saw a small black vein exposed in Stark's messy clothes. "Tony, what is this?" With that said, Pepper was about to reach out and unbutton Stark's clothes. She knew there was something wrong with Stark's health, but she didn't know that his illness had become so serious. Looking at Pepper reaching over, Stark was obviously panicked, and he shouted loudly, "Pepper, don't be like this, there are others here." However, Stark's efforts to stop him were unsuccessful. Little Pepper still saw the serious condition on his chest. "Oh no." She covered her mouth with sadness in her eyes. "You never told me that your illness is so serious." Seeing Pepper throw herself into his arms, Stark looked helpless. Originally, with the existence of Luya in the company, he did not intend to let Pepper know about his condition. Unfortunately, it was still discovered today. "Tony, you don't have to do this. As I said at the beginning, there are no alternatives to palladium. Perhaps you can go look at the old things left by your father and you may be able to find the answer." Luya said softly as if he was afraid of disturbing the two people hugging each other. Episode 57, Thor arrives. In fact, the Superman template also brings a smarter brain to Luya. However, it is up to Luya itself to develop a clean energy source that can replace palladium, which will take too long and may not be successful. After all, Luya has not yet fully obtained the full strength of the Man of Steel. Then again, if you had the full strength of Superman, you might be able to find other solutions. When Luya mentioned that there might be clues about new elements that could replace palladium in his father's old belongings, Stark became excited again. By the way, it seems that the director of SHIELD also knows about this, right? Luya is actually not sure whether Fury knows that there are clues to new elements in Stark's father's old things. But in the movie, Fury does channel Stark. Luya said this just to remind Stark not to be surrounded by lies anymore. So, Luya looked at Natasha Romanoff again, smiled and said, "Yes, Miss Natasha Romanoff. Or should I say, Miss Black Widow?" At this time, Stark did not recognize Natasha Romanoff's identity. Therefore, when hearing Luya call Natasha Romanoff Black Widow, Stark looked at the Black Widow with shocked eyes. "So, you're from SHIELD?" He couldn't believe that his secretary was actually an undercover agent assigned by SHIELD. Being betrayed by the people around her was something Stark couldn't tolerate, no matter how attractive her appearance was to him. When her identity was revealed, Natasha Romanoff's eyes flashed with confusion. According to the intelligence in the bureau, Luya probably doesn't know his identity at all. It's just that it's useless to think so much. She knew that Director Fury's plan to recruit Stark was about to come to nothing. "Tony." Natasha Romanoff looked at Stark, who was glaring at her, and said, "Director, he has no ill intentions, he just wants to invite you to join us." Regarding Natasha Romanoff's remarks, Luya said it was difficult to comment. Fury has indeed done a lot for the safety of the Earth, and is indeed a relatively reliable leader. But for his team, he will collect weaknesses to make checks and balances. Luya cannot say that this behavior is wrong. But at the very least, he couldn't accept it. Tony took a deep breath. "Okay, let's go, Miss Natasha Romanoff, you will be fired from now on." Stark doesn't want to continue to be entangled with Natasha Romanoff anymore. Now he only hopes that he can really do what Luya said and find clues to new elements from his father's old things. Seeing Stark's determined look, Natasha Romanoff could only sigh and prepare to leave. Before leaving, she took a deep look at Luya. As if he wanted to see the secret of Luya. It's just that Luya's expression is always smiling, and nothing can be seen. New Mexico. A man wearing sunglasses is driving a car. In the back seat of the car, a tall blonde man wearing a hospital gown was sleeping at ease. The man in sunglasses is an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., and the man in the back seat of his car is Thor, who came to Earth. However, at this time, Thor has been temporarily sealed because of Odin. Even as Thor's hammer, he has temporarily lost the qualification to use it. Originally, the person who came to inquire about Del's situation should be Agent Coulson. But because of the lore, it was replaced with another one. And just when Agent Sunglasses was about to enter New York with Thor and go to S.H.I.E.L.D., Sol woke up directly as the effect of the medicine wore off. Looking at the guy who murdered himself, Thor roared angrily. Mortal, do you know who you are facing? I am Odin's son, Thor. You actually did this to me? In Thor's view, people on Earth are all people under the rule of God. Now, God's people are provoking God. How can this not make Thor angry? As he spoke, Sol punched the car door next to him. There was a clang. Although Thor had tried his best, he still did not bang on the door, despite being sealed. God? The agent with sunglasses who was driving looked at Sol mockingly. Obviously, he has regarded Thor as a lunatic. Odin, isn't that a god that only exists in mythology? The sunglasses agent's attitude angered Sol again. He shouted angrily, Mortal! You are bringing trouble to Midgard. He has decided that after returning to Asgard again, he must punish this backward and barbaric planet. The god King Odin ruled the 9 realms. During this period, Thor still had the pride of being a god. When the angry Sol saw that he could not open the car door, he started to attack the sunglasses agent. Although he has lost his divine power, his fighting consciousness and physical fitness are definitely not comparable to ordinary people. Therefore, when Agent Sunglasses was defenseless, Thor knocked him down with a punch. Bang! Opening the car door, Sol quickly ran out. Shield. Fury was holding the phone and was talking nice to Stark on the other end of the phone. But Stark's voice didn't seem to buy it. What kind of visitor comes from the sky? Wouldn't it be better to let your agent solve him? After saying that, Stark put down his phone. Obviously, he is still worried about Natasha Romanoff. However, after thinking about it, he decided to go and stop the so-called visitor from the sky. Although he is not interested in Fury now, he still believes in what Fury said about the existence of alien forces. Tony, you can't go out. The new elements haven't been developed yet. You can't overuse the armor anymore. Little Pepper looked at her boyfriend who was about to put on the armor, and she grabbed him anxiously. Just 2 days ago, the 2 people who had solved the knot in their hearts finally confirmed their identity as a couple in advance. Looking at Luya who was sitting aside watching the show, Little Pepper hurriedly said, Luya, please persuade him quickly. Stark was unyielding and still insisted on solving it himself. I'm Iron Man, I can't let this matter go unchecked. Tisk. Watching the 2 of them fighting, Luya showed a bored expression. He had eaten too much dog food in the past few days as a guest in Stark's office. Okay, stop pretending, I'll just go and solve it. When they heard that Luya was going to go in person, the 2 people who were pulling him stopped immediately. Stark smiled and said, come back early and we'll continue the party tonight. Study during the day and party at night. Well, a good balance between work and rest. Luya raised his eyebrows. Such a life is so beautiful, so depraved. Activating his supervision, he directly locked onto the figure in the photo sent by Fury on Stark's phone. A visitor from heaven who looks like this. Thor? Boom. A sonic boom sounded and the Luya disappeared out of the window. Episode 58, Odin's Gaze. At this time, Thor had not yet established a bond with Earth, Midgard. In his eyes now, the mortals of Midgard were pitifully weak and at the same time quite backward. As for the sunglasses agent from Shield, his strength is not that strong. In addition, although Thor's divine power was restricted by Odin, his physical fitness is still very high. Moreover, although he was born late, Thor also experienced many battles at this time. Therefore, the failure of the sunglasses agent is natural. At this time, Shield's surveillance system located Thor's location from a distance, but no one was sent to provoke him. Outside the burger restaurant, Sol was carrying a bag in his hand, which contained about a dozen burgers. Behind him, a female clerk rushed out. Hey, handsome, did you forget to pay? If Sol hadn't been tall and handsome, she would have even wondered if he came here to eat the king's meal on purpose. Money? Sol rubbed his head in embarrassment. At this time, he was wearing clothes that didn't fit well, and the muscles all over his body were almost bursting the shirt. This outfit was taken off from the sunglasses agent who was knocked unconscious by him. The female clerk looked at Sol who was hesitating, but it was a pity that she already had a family and no money. Otherwise, if the time goes back 10 years, I will definitely be willing to pay for this handsome guy, and then it is best to have some stories happen. Sol looked at the female clerk who spoke kindly to him. She was not as rude as she was to the previous agent. Just when the situation was a little awkward, an equally tall figure walked out from behind Sol. How much? I paid for him. Luya held a handful of banknotes in his hand and didn't bother to count them, so he handed them all to the female clerk. Wow, another handsome blonde guy. Looking at Luya, who was on par with Sol, and even a little colder, the female clerk once again showed a nymphomaniac expression on her face. As for Sol, seeing someone willing to pay for him, he was naturally very happy. It seems that not all mortals in Midgard are as rude as the guy before. Thank you very much. However, although he was somewhat grateful, what Thor was thinking about now was his hammer. At this time, Thor's hammer Mjolnir was still regarded by Thor as a symbol of his identity and divine power. He is still dreaming that after getting the hammer, he can return to Asgard. Look at Sol's ill-fitting top, and even his pants don't fit. Luya's expression became a little weird. If I remember correctly, in the photo Fury sent to Tony, the agent who brought Thor back to SHIELD seemed to be wearing this outfit, right? At this time, Thor, who had turned around and walked a few steps, suddenly stopped. He forgot again that he had no idea where he was in Midgard. While he was in a coma, he was taken all the way to New York by the Sunglasses agent. How could he still know where he had just landed on Earth? Bring it on. Thor stretched out a hand and muttered Mjolnir's name silently, trying to summon her. Unfortunately, he failed again. Having lost his divine power, and coupled with the dictates of God King Odin, it is impossible for Thor at this stage to establish a connection with Mjolnir. Damn it. After swearing, Sol's expression became more and more impatient. If you don't have divine power, you can't summon a hammer. How can you restore your divine power without a hammer? As said in the original movie, Thor still doesn't understand at this time that Thor's hammer exists because Thor came first. Thor is not the one who picks up the hammer. Dude. Luya looked at Sol, who was walking aimlessly, and called him out. If you don't mind, maybe I can arrange a place for you to rest. Of course, the resting place Lua mentioned was not S.H.I.E.L.D. Instead, he wants to take Thor to Stark. Thor, who has divine power, is also above the planet level, correct the bug in the movie. At the same time, Thor's power will continue to increase as he grows older. For example, in the movie, if he can fight Thanos, then his strength has at least reached a level close to that of Yu Tianfu. However, after hearing Luya's suggestion, Sol suddenly looked at Luya with vigilant eyes. Sunglasses agent had used similar reasons to deceive Sol before, so Sol had already doubted this statement in his heart. Therefore, when faced with Luya's proposal, he directly refused. Okay. Luya waved his hand, but what if I help you find your hammer? If it had been anyone else, Luya would have taken advantage of him and taken him back by force. But Thor is different. He is the son of the god king Odin. Old Odin's strength is at its peak, and the strength of the Heavenly Father is not something that he can shake at this stage. In fact, Odin was watching his son at this time. Lures were also seen. However, because of the special nature of Midgard, the Ancient One also talked to him. He now also wants to see how much potential Midgard, which has produced super powerful men like Ancient One, still has. So there is no need to worry about Luya. Mjolnir means a lot to Thor, and when he heard that Luya was willing to get the hammer back for him, he naturally agreed. Only, how did you know I was looking for Mjolnir? That's not important, just say whether you want it or not. Can. However, what Thor was thinking was, as long as he got Mjolnir, wouldn't he be able to summon the Rainbow Bridge and go home? Here, after hearing Sol's agreement, Luya grabbed him and prepared to take him to fly over. You? Sol was shocked, and then his expression became angry. Obviously, he thought Luya was deceiving him. Cunning mortal. He stretched out his hand to fend off the lure. However, despite relying too much on divine power and hammers, his physical quality is much stronger than that of ordinary people. But in front of Luya, his speed is no different from that of a baby. Call. After the strong wind passed, Luya had already opened Sol's arm and put it on his shoulder. Me? You? Feeling that Luya's arm was branded on his shoulder, Sol suppressed his blush and did not move Luya's arm away. This made him more and more annoyed, and at the same time, he couldn't help but doubt himself. Even though he has lost his divine power and Mjolnir is no longer around, his body shouldn't be inferior to that of a mortal? Beyond the planet, Asgard. Seeing Thor's unsatisfactory look, Odin also showed a helpless expression on his face. He could feel that Luya's strength had not yet broken through to the Tianfu level and was still at the planet level. In other words, his son Sol's strength should be about the same as Luya. Episode 59, Am I Innocent? However, although he was also at the planet level, Luya's physical strength clearly crushed Thor. Odin looked at his son Thor with complicated eyes. He was extremely lucky that he discovered this problem in time and sent him to Midgard for training. Thor's problem is that he places too much emphasis on divine power and his own Mjolnir, but ignores his own original power as Thor. A god is so weak after losing his divine power. How can he take over the important responsibilities of Asgard in the future? Odin knows that his lifespan is running out, and there is not much time left for Thor to grow up. There are too many strong people in the universe. In deep space, Thanos is killing people everywhere, preparing to collect the infinite stones. At this time, he had already reached the sub-Heavenly Father level. However, due to the existence of the Ancient One and the god King Odin, he did not dare to approach the Earth or the Nine Realms. Today, the Ancient One is dead. God King Odin has very little life left. Once he dies, Thanos will have no final scruples. Earth. Just as Sol was still immersed in the shock of being completely crushed by Luya. Next, he once again felt the shock from the mortal in Midgard. Pulling Sol's shoulders, Luya bent his legs slightly. Immediately afterwards, the biological force field opened up, just covering himself and Thor. Then, the speed of Mach 10 exploded again. Boom. New Mexico, desert. Not long after, Luya arrived at Thor's hammer, based on the location sent by Tony. Boom. After landing with Sol, Luya let go of his arm. Cough. After just experiencing extremely fast flight and finally standing on the ground, Thor exhaled and calmed his violently beating heart. Although Asgard is a race of gods, their racial characteristics do not have the ability to fly. Sol looked at Luya with complicated eyes. Luya, right? You are the strongest mortal I have ever seen. Judging from Luya's performance just now, the proud Sol also had to admit in his heart that the opponent's strength may not be worse than his own peak. In other words, stronger. However, Thor still doesn't want to believe that his magnificent Thor, the son of God King Odin, can actually be inferior to a mortal. And when he looked at Mjolnir, who was covered by a transparent cover in front of him, his mind became active again. At the very least, I found Mjolnir, right? So Thor stretched out a hand again. Come on, meow meow. Come on, meow meow. Meow meow? 3 times in a row, Sol's voice changed from affectionate to doubtful to heartbreaking. He had to admit that the reason why he couldn't summon Mjolnir was not because he was too far away from it. Basically, he was completely sealed and even lost his divine power. Why, Dad? Sol's eyes gradually lost their luster. He could tolerate other things, but being unable to resonate with Mjolnir was really unbearable. Next to Mjolnir, several people who were visiting also noticed the movement here. The main reason is that when the lore descends, although the speed is reduced, there is still a sonic boom. Just because of the flying dust in the desert, when the dust cleared, a girl ran over. Hello, are you also here for inspection? That hammer is very strange. I don't know what material it is made of. It's so small that we can't even pull it with a car. Jane Foster is Sol's girlfriend in the movie. At this time, as an astrophysicist, she was attracted here by the abnormal phenomenon caused by Thor's hammer. Thor was still immersed in the sadness of being unable to summon Mjolnir at this time. After hearing Jane Foster's words, he suddenly regained hope. If you can't summon it, then you can't summon it. As Mjolnir's master, it's the same thing if you take it away with your own hands. Thinking of this, Thor's eyes ignited with hope again and he walked towards the hammer. As he walked, he said, Mjolnir is the symbol of Thor, and only I can touch her. Of course you mortals can't pick her up. Saying this, the love in Sol's eyes almost overflowed. Jane Foster stared blankly at the side. I know this is a hammer. For those who didn't know, I thought Mjolnir was a beauty. Then she looked at Luya, the man who appeared with Sol. Ahem, his mind is a little bad, you know. Luya raised the corners of his mouth and said casually. Oh, that's it. What a pity for such a handsome guy. Jane Foster showed her true face. In front of him, when he heard Luya's rumor, the corner of Sol's mouth twitched. If it weren't for the fact that he knew he was no match for Luya, he would definitely have to compete with Luya. When he reached Mjolnir, Jane Foster's companions made way for him. Come on, meow meow, I'll take you home. Behind him, the watch on Luya's wrist suddenly made a beeping sound. Clicking to connect, Stark's voice came. Luya, how's it going? Meet an interesting guy. Luya glanced at Sol, who was still a little silly. Tony, I will meet you later. You will definitely like him. The current Thor is simply terrifying. Although he has the experience of fighting in all directions, he is still a guy who has not grown up at heart. Luya is looking forward to what kind of character Thor will become when he meets Stark in his Playboy period. On the other side, Thor opened the glass cover and held Mjolnir. Use force. Seeing Mjolnir motionless, Thor's heart was completely broken. At this moment, Jane Foster came to Sol and said with a smile, How is it, Lord Thor? Jane Foster believes that the weight of this hammer may exceed several tons. Otherwise, it would be impossible for it to remain completely motionless under the pull of the car. Asgard, Odin looked at his son with an incomprehensible look. He placed a magical curse on the hammer, making it impossible for Thor, who had lost his divine power, to move it with physical strength. Then, his eyes suddenly opened wide. Luya walked up to Sol and patted him on the shoulder. Then, with a flick of his hand, he picked up the hammer from the ground. Looking at the hammer in his hand, to be honest, Luya himself was a little surprised. First of all, he was sure that he did not pick up the hammer with physical strength. Luya remembered that the curse of Thor's hammer was not to increase its weight. To pick it up, in addition to reaching a strength close to Odin's. Then you can only pick it up with a strong heart and firm belief. Just like Cap and Vision in the movie. One of them is righteous and strong in heart, and the other is simple in heart. So Thor's hammer thinks that I am a righteous and pure person in heart? Luya looked inside and couldn't help but become suspicious. Episode 60, The Team Assembles. Luya's ability to lift Thor's hammer has proven his inner strength. However, Sol, who was standing next to Luya, didn't know this. In his eyes, Mjolnir is not only a symbol of his Thor identity. Her existence is more like that of her lover. Now, it's okay if his divine power is sealed by his father Odin. Even Mjolnir stopped paying attention to him. Even if she ignored herself, she was actually lifted up by someone else. At this moment, the heartbroken Sol felt that his whole world was over. He murmured, "Meow meow?" No. Well, although it's quite impressive that he can lift this weird hammer. At this time, Jane Foster came over. Of course she was very shocked that Luya could lift this strange hammer. After all, she and her companions tried various methods, but could not move the hammer at all. But at the same time, she was a little strange about Sol's sad face that turned green. As for that? You are a grown man, but this hammer is not who you are. If you can't lift it, then you can't lift it. Why is it so sad? Jane Foster still doesn't know Thor's identity, and of course she doesn't understand the significance of Mjolnir to Thor. Otherwise, she would never have said such heartbreaking words. Sure enough, after hearing Jane Foster's last strike, Thor's expression became even more bitter. It seemed as if the tears in his eyes would flow out in the next second. Asgard. God King Odin is still watching Midgard. Seeing that Luya could lift Mjolnir, his one eye narrowed slightly. He could feel that the feeling Luya gave him was definitely not the aura of justice. However, after spending a long time, he no longer simply judges people based on good and evil. As for his son Thor, Odin actually hated iron. Thor relies so much on divine power and Mjolnir, which is very detrimental to his future development. Just like now, once he loses his divine power, Thor loses most of his strength. And this is quite dangerous when facing future difficulties. Whether it is magic, divine power, physical power, etc., there is a possibility of being restrained. Only through diversified development will you have enough strength to face various enemies and difficulties. Midgard. After getting Thor's hammer, Luya took Thor back to New York. Of course, not SHIELD, but straight back to Stark Tower. Luya has his own ideas about the Avengers in the movie. First of all, Thanos' strength should be between the sub-Heavenly Father and the Heavenly Father level. This is not yet certain until we meet him in person. The key lies in whether Thanos is wearing the Infinity Stones when he appears. Otherwise, even with the blessing of only one Infinity Stone, Thanos' strength would definitely be at the level of a Heavenly Father. Not to mention, when Thanos gathered 6 gems and snapped his fingers, the destructive energy had reached a terrifying single-universe level. Luya has a very clear understanding of his current power, which is the ultimate planet level. However, the difficulty of crossing from the planet level to the sub-Heavenly Father is probably more difficult than that of the Skyfather level to the single-universe level. Just like Superman in all stages, during the Man of Steel period, he needed to receive a lot of radiation from the yellow sun to improve himself. But once you have the power of Ishuancy, your power will expand rapidly and infinitely. Therefore, I'm not sure if I can progress Man of Steel to full level before Thanos arrives. Then, it is also necessary to recruit some teammates. Moreover, Luya seriously doubts that everyone in the reunion is blessed by luck. The most classic one is the 50-50 US team. Theoretically speaking, Captain America in the movie should only have the strength of super creatures. It can be seen from the fact that he has to catch his breath when jumping from a tall building using vibranium shield, that he is far from even planet level. And Thanos has been fighting all over the universe a long time ago and bloodbathed many planets. Easily slaughtering planets, this is a real strength superior to that of Yashin Father. And Captain America is able to deal with such Thanos in a few moves. Stark Industries. Oh. Lua, who is this handsome guy? Happy was the one who spoke. He looked at Sol's figure with covetous eyes, the envy in his eyes almost overflowing. A friend of mine. By the way, where is Tony? At this time, Happy and Luya were already familiar with each other, and speaking of it, Luya was actually Happy's boss. After all, after Stark gave part of his shares to Pepper, Luya's shares have even exceeded Stark's own. Oh, Tony, he was in the office just now. Signing that he was clear, Luya took Sol, whose eyes were still a little dull, to Tony's private office. At the door of the office, a green light swept across the lintel. The office door popped open automatically. This is facial scan unlocking, which Stark set up to prevent unauthorized persons from entering his office. As for the lore, Stark entered his facial fingerprints and other information early on. This also means that Luya can enter and leave here at any time. Of course, after today, Stark regretted why he entered the lore information. When Luya opened the door, Two figures in the office were sitting on the sofa hugging each other. It seemed that Stark was still lying on Pepper's chest, as if looking for comfort. Oh, ****. Upon noticing someone entering his office, Stark jumped up and wiped the tears from his eyes with his hand. Luya could see clearly that they were tears. Compared to Stark, Pepper is more mature and less startled. Just now, Luya was not around. Stark has successfully identified a new element to replace palladium. Next, just use it to upgrade the reactor. This is why Stark and Pepper embraced each other. Of course Stark is happy to be able to survive. He still has such a wonderful life and so many creative ideas. After seeing clearly that the person who came in was Luya, Stark breathed a sigh of relief and tried to change the subject. So, he turned his attention to Sol. Is this stupid big blonde guy what Fury is looking for? With his innocent eyes and dull movements, Thor does look a bit like a big fool now. Only. Luya touched his hair and then looked at his bulging, well-proportioned muscles. Blonde, silly guy? Luya wondered if it was because he had just ruined Stark's good deeds that he was deliberately scheming against him. Cough. Stark coughed dryly, his eyes evasive. How is that possible? Luya. We are as close as brothers.